Welcome to Istaa's Mourn.
Anvil of War! Tackling terrain!
Hey guys, and welcome to the table reveal for Istaa's Mourn, our brand new Urban Conquest City Fight table for the channel. First of all, I want to do a huge shout out to Sequence Comics and Games in Brockville, Ontario. They provided us with a whole bunch of the Kill Team box set terrain sets, and then on top of that they donated us a whole bunch of the Sector Imperialis terrain sets, and that really was the only reason that we were able to do this, because these sets are, I'm not going to say that they're cheap. they're pretty expensive sets, and but they're totally worth the money. I mean, the value of these things, just from when you start putting one of the sets together for the city ruins, it's just unbelievable what you can do with it. I really wanted to kind of stretch the bounds of them and not just do all 90-degree building corner ruins. I really wanted to see what else I could do with it, and the inspiration came from, first and foremost, having the pieces. So again, thank you to Sequence and also to Red Dragon in Ottawa. So jumping into this table, I really want to talk about all of the different elements and kind of the inspiration behind creating this. There was a ton of inspiration on all of the Facebook groups across Facebook related to Warhammer 40k and terrain building, and there's lots of great YouTubers out there that have given you maybe some examples on ways to do ruins and ways to paint ruins and all of that. So really it was just drawing from all of those sources and coming up with our own things. So when I talk about this table, I got to talk about the fundamentals of building it first. And when I was building the ruins, I really wanted each individual piece to look like it had some damage to it, and it was really heavily worn. I wanted the city to look like it had been essentially carpet bombed. And when we're going into the look of the buildings and everything related to the ruins, I really wanted to come up with a backstory for it. So Istaa's Mourn is really a shrine city. It was developed after Saint Istaa, a champion of the Emperor, fell in battle fighting the armies of chaos, the forces of chaos, and this world was kind of a shrine to their memory, and it essentially was thrown into turmoil, into a war zone, and was carpet bombed, was leveled. So you see real damage throughout every single building and every single piece of terrain on this table. Starting with the craters in each of the ruin sections, I wanted to build up on the craters and the insides of the building, but also make it still playable. If you go too far with it, sometimes you end up having too much textured terrain. You're going to get cuck dice everywhere. You're going to end up having a real struggle with placing models. So trying to find that delicate balance of making it look good and making it look as realistic as possible, but also making it playable and making it not a pain in the rear end to play on. So when we wanted to kind of expand on the ruins, I wanted to start with craters, because there has to be an impact location, an impact site for the building to have received all this damage and torn off half of the building. So doing that, I decided to use the Battlefield in the Box Battlefield in the Box crater set. And the craters are great. They're really heavy, so they add a little bit of weight to the plastic sets, and it just gives the terrain a little bit more weight on the table, so they're not sliding around as much. And what I did was I took those and I slapped them in the middle of the ruins, and then I also used some plastic tiles that I got from the dollar store, which have these little tiny squares, like mini tiles, which are almost perfect for the scale of Warhammer 40,000. And I put those in locations within the building kind of limits, within the frame of the building, and basically based every single building with these to create a little bit of texture and a little bit of detail inside the buildings, So it wasn't just all rubble. Then from there, I did my basing materials, and I took chunks of buildings, I took chunks of damaged pieces left over from the Sector Imperialis ruin sets, and I also used some of the sets from the Urban Conquest box set, which has a few little ruin rubble piles that have been incorporated just to give it a little bit more, just a little bit more detail again. And I piled it up, and I used corkboard from the dollar store. So what I did was I took those and I broke them all apart, and I piled them up and made rubble everywhere I can, including some pieces which were pretty much entirely rubble. I mean, when we're talking about specific pieces, I actually used some styrofoam, some insulation foam as the core, and then just built up the ruined rubble around it, again using those spare pieces and using the broken up corkboard. And I just built up on it to make it look like the building had completely collapsed in on itself. And then I used some of the lower lying pieces of ruins, the lower L sections from the ruins, to create sort of a boundary around the building to make it look like the building had kind of collapsed in on itself and left those piles of rubble. Again, when making those, it was a real challenge because I did want to make some flat parts of that so that we could place models, larger models, and even infantry, and have them able to move over and through the ruins without creating too much of a hassle for the players, because that inevitably damages your table as well. When people are trying to cram, 50 infantry into a building, they're going to be, bumping stuff with their hands. It's inevitable. So ease of access and making it easy to play on were definitely factors when coming into making a table like this, and it's something you should always take into consideration. I mean, you want the table to look beautiful, but you also want it to function. So really kind of have to find that balance. So moving on from creating the rubble in the buildings, I also wanted some sections to kind of tie in and be like sort of custom, because if the whole table was just the Sector Imperialis ruin sets, it would still look glorious. Again, beautiful terrain sets, amazing to work with. But so that kind of got me into working on these the wall sections. So the wall sections, the concrete fences or concrete wall sections are just styrofoam. They're just basically foam core and some PVC sheets, so to make the basing. All of this stuff was based on a PVC sheeting, and what it is it's just a really compressed plastic, and it's a little bit more difficult to cut and work with, but what it does do, which I find that MDF doesn't do, is it stays flat. So MDF over time, it'll eventually warp. As you put glue on it and you put a lot of materials or wet materials on top of it, it starts to pull up. And over time, you will get some warping, where the PVC is a little bit more resistant to that over time. And I find it's a really good material to work with. So check that out. You can find it in a lot of hobby stores. And if you want to find out more on how we made these concrete wall sections, it's just check out our video. We made a video, tackling terrain video, on creating those from scratch. So yeah, check that out. So once we've gone on from the bases of the buildings and these wall sections, we're now moving on to the little details that really increase the immersion of playing on the tabletop and kind of get you into the world that we've created. So little details that we built up. I'm just going to talk about these for a second. These light posts, these little ruined rubble piles, and then the individual light posts, they may not come into play when it comes to the game itself. You might not end up getting line of sight blocking terrain from them, although you could come up with some cool custom rules related to them. I had an idea for a scenario called Hot Night in the City. And essentially what it is we have all of these light posts all over the place, and you're playing in a night fight in the city. And what ends up happening is the lights will create sort of an aura, which makes things easier to hit. Everything outside of that aura is harder to hit. And you can actually individually shoot out the lights, kind of special ops style, putting out the lights so that you can embrace the darkness. Maybe if you're a Drakari or something, you just want to live in that darkness. So just a kind of an idea, and it's a cool little piece of terrain that we threw together. Now, when we're looking at these are actually from the dollar store, and they're from a Christmas set. So they were Christmas lights, and they were really affordable to get a whole bunch of them, and I thought they just looked the right scale, the right look. They have a little bit of like a gothic vibe to them, so they were really good at tying in with the rest of the terrain set. So again, keep your eyes open. There's inspiration all around you. There's inspiration in every store that you go to. So keep an eye out for those little pieces, and collect them along the way. And when you end up making a table like this or taking on a full project like this, you end up finding these little pieces along the way that you're like, oh, this is perfect for it, and you jump in and you grab it. When we're talking about painting this table, I really wanted to keep it simple. I didn't want to spend a whole year picking out all the details and taking a really long time to do it. I like to try to turn out 2-3 tables in a year, not one. So I wanted to keep it simple, and that starts with the basing or the base coats. So I ended up doing a lot of rattle can painting with this, a lot more than I'm used to, and it really came from a Zenithal prime. I primed everything black. From there, I went to a sort of a darker shade of gray. And then from there, I hit the top surfaces before it had a full chance to dry. I hit the top surface with some white, which just ended up giving it this really cool shading. And again, if you're hitting it from a top angle with the rattle can, you're able to get like a pretty even coat if you don't let it dry fully. And anybody that's ever done Zenithal before, it really, really complements the other colors that you're going to be putting on top of it. Speaking of, there was only really one other color that I added to this table upon looking at how the Zenithal had kind of formed the rest of the building. I knew that I really wanted to rust out and create a little bit of like a burnt out effect. So when you're doing a burnt out effect, you're thinking rusty, you're thinking a brown kind of color, and I just ended up taking burnt umber from Vallejo, throwing it through the airbrush, and when I hit the Zenithal with that burnt umber, it really brought out this very burnt out plus rusty kind of color, and it really complemented the dark grays and all of the whites that hit from the Zenithal. So now, if you're looking at it, you can see that I just picked out all of the sort of what would be the copper or the gold accents on the building, and instead hit it with this brown, and it just came together perfectly for carpet bombing, firebomb city. And then from there, I just hit some of the edges and really went heavy with a black inside the buildings. I just hit all of the interior of the building with a black, but just did it at different intensities to leave some of the white and leave some of the Zenithal showing in pockets, but also the brown that I had added, but also to create some scorched areas that made it look like there was some intense flame inside these buildings. And also, I mean, as war is going on, maybe this city hasn't had a lot of attention recently, so it's kind of derelict. It's starting to kind of show its time is starting to show on all the buildings and the weathering. So I also used the brown just do some little streaks and stuff down the buildings, do some of the rivets, and just hit it really quickly, just to create some bleeding from. I mean, if there was some rain or something setting on the rivets and such, it's going to create. I mean, anybody that's seen rust before knows that it starts to kind of bleed out into areas. So that was kind of the gist of painting it. From there, I decided to hit a little bit of some of the lights, not all of the lights, but just some of them with some Vallejo. So I just hit it with like a really light green, and then just a little spray of white just to hit the middle of it. And that was just to create some color on it. And again, I hit it in specific lights. I didn't want every single light to be lit up, because I mean, as this thing has taken damage over time, and as it has progressively gotten more and more weathered, some of those lights are going to start going out. You're not necessarily going to have full lighting for forever. So anyways, really enjoyed building this. Really had a great time, especially throwing models on the finished pieces and just kind of playing it as I went. And figuring out the right size and the right spacing for specific models, making sure that a dreadnought could fit inside the building and out the doors, and just making sure this was a prime place for a sniper to be sitting and watching out over top of the battlefield and picking its targets. So real immersion in building the table, real immersion, I hope, playing on the table. Speaking of playing on the table, you guys can check out this table at Red Dragon in Ottawa, Ontario, and as well we will be circulating it, and it'll be going out to Brockville and playing at Sequence as well. So if you guys want to throw dice down on this table, please enjoy it and go check out their stores.
Sponsored by
Thanks again for watching Anvil of War Gaming. Consider subscribing to our channel by clicking the icon on the screen, or check out some more of our videos. Shooting videos for YouTube is hard work. I have to stand here and hold this board for 20 minutes. But I'm helping.